So first things first, let's get the sensor settings set up so that you can ensure that your data is coming in the correct way. So to do that, you can come to the Sensors tab here on the left and then find the relevant sensor that you want to adjust the settings for. To adjust the settings, you click on these three dots in the top right of that sensor and then click Sensor Settings. This brings up this drop-down menu to manage sensor settings. To start here with the basic information, you can input the sensor name here to give it a particular name so that it's recognizable. You can give the sensor a description and then you specify the sensor type. So here we're looking at a counter-accumulative type, which is what we recommend should it be a counting sensor. But there's also the measurement option should it be an analog sensor for, let's say, temperature, humidity, vibration, whatever that might be. You can see there's a various list of sensors that you can explore yourself with the description underneath each one. But for now, let's stick this to a counter-accumulative. Moving then to the next sensor setup tab. This is quite important. This is your data multiplier. So in this instance, this is talking about every time something passes the sensor, what does that account for? So in this case, it's 1. So every time something passes this sensor, that counts as 1 unit. However, for some customers, let's say things pass in a pack of 6. So when the sensor passes each time, you'd set your data multiplier to 6 so that it knows every time something passes, that accounts for 6 individual units. Moving on next to the type of sensor. We will either send a PNP or an NPN sensor to you, and this is important that this matches it. If you're unsure of which type of sensor it is, you can reach out to your contact person at Factbird who can let you know whether it needs to be PNP or NPN. Moving on to the speeds tab. This is also very, very important that you get these speeds correct. So we have two types of speeds in this system. There's the validated and the expected speed. Beginning with the validated speed at the top, this is the max possible speed that the line could be moving at. So this is put in pieces per minute, which means that in this current state, the max speed this sensor could capture data at is 200 pieces per minute. It's very important that you get this max correct because this is used to calculate your OEE and analyze your performance over time in terms of speed loss, because of course the line is moving at less of a speed than it actually physically could. Your expected speed then is actually the speed that you expect the line to run at. So of course there is a max speed that it could possibly be, but the expected speed is the more realistic speed that you actually expect the line to be running at. And that is used to calculate, your targets and again, analyze your performance to make sure that you're performing at the speed that you expect to. Moving on to the data. Here you start to just get into the smaller nitty-gritty of what exactly it is you produce. So the data unit here, you have different options depending on what type of sensor it is. Since this is a counter sensor, we're going to keep it at pieces, but here you can see there's options for weight, vibration, pressure. So whatever is relevant for the type of sensor that you're using, that's what you input here. Then there's the custom label of the pieces of the data unit. So for example, if you are at a brewery, you may put this as bottles. If you are, at a cartoning company, you would put this at cartons. Depending on what it is that you produce, you can put this in so that all of the data, when it's displayed to you, is actually telling you how many of whatever it is that you've produced. The chart data filter, we recommend typically leaving it at the average speed if it's a counter sensor, but again, you can see there's options for uptime or whatever that might be, but typically we recommend leaving this at average speed. And then the scale here, you can decide whether this sensor displays primarily in pieces per minute, pieces per hour, or pieces per day, depending on which metric you think is most relevant to you. So now let's look at one of the most important settings to set up in your sensor settings, and that is the stops tab, because that's going to classify what constitutes a stop and when you need to register a stop. So it's very important to get this right. So clicking over here to stops, then you're going to come down to this toggle button here to enable finding stops so that the system starts calculating when a stop has occurred. And then here at the top, you have your minimum stop duration. So this is the amount of time that nothing will have passed the sensor for that counts as a stop. So in this instance, it's 60 seconds. So if nothing has passed this sensor for 1 minute, Factbird will identify that as a stop on the line. But not every stop is going to need a registration because it might just be a micro stop. That's why we have this stop registration threshold down here. Now, this is how long the line will have to be stopped for in order for you to need stop registration from one of your operators. So at this point, it's set to 600. That would be 10 minutes. So the way it's set up now, if the line has been down for 1 minute and nothing has passed the sensor, then that counts as a stop. But then if the line has been down for 10 minutes, that stop will need to be given a reason. by your operators. So this is just to avoid your operators needing to register every single micro stop that happens on the line. So that's if nothing is passing the sensor, but sometimes things might be passing the sensor, but at such a slow rate that it could be constituted as a stop. And that's why we've set up the value threshold here in the system. So you can set this here, let's set this to 10, for example. And now with the 10 value threshold, if less than 10 pieces have passed this sensor in a minute, that will be constituted as a stop. And so your operators will need to give attribution for that. And until it goes above that threshold again, the stop will continue. So moving on to stops mapping here, that's how if we have a PLC integration with Factbird, the stops could automatically be registered. But for the vast majority of our customers, this tab isn't relevant, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. However, if you do have tags automatically, putting stop reasons in, then this page will be more relevant, but you can go over that with your Factbird contact. The line setup we'll go over in more detail later, but this is essentially would just bring you to the page of the line that this sensor is associated with, but we'll go over the line settings later in this video. And the missing data alarms is to let you know if this sensor has gone offline. So you can set up a threshold here of, let's say, 5 minutes or 1 minute or whatever it might be for you. You put it in seconds. And that will let you know that if this device has gone offline, or if you're not receiving any data from this device for that amount of time, you will get an alarm, and you can also set up follow-up alarms here. So it's a super useful way to know, is my sensor actually online? So now that you have your sensor configured, you're going to want to validate that data to make sure the sensor settings are correct. You can do that by coming into a line here and seeing the live data come through. So if you remember the speeds that we set up earlier, the validated and the expected speeds, that's represented by these two lines on this graph. So this green line up the top here, that is your validated speed. That is the max this line could run at. And so as you can see, the data should never go above that line, because that would mean that you've set your validated speed too low. So as you can see, all of this data is below that line, but pretty close to it, meaning that you've done a good job of setting your validated speed. The darker line underneath, just over here, that is the expected speed. That's the speed that you expect the line to run at. And so all of the data should fall in between that expected speed and this validated speed, or most of the data at least. You can see these stoppages are when the line kind of fell off, but here you can see the majority of the time it is between the expected speed, but not above the validated speed, meaning you've set up your speeds correctly. Now, we also set up the stops registration threshold. If you come to the register stops page here, you can see that these stops have started to register over that amount of time that you set. So you can see that when these red blocks have appeared, it means that you've set up your stops correctly, and you can adjust over time whether you think that the stop threshold should become a bit lower or a bit higher. If you feel like you're registering too many stops or not capturing enough stops, you can play around with that. But once you see these red blocks appearing on the register stops page, it means that the system is up and running registering stops.